So, as the title says, I am going to get the COVID-19 vaccine. But I do have to admit that I've had reservations. And I wanted to explain my hesitancy because I feel like the current nature of our discourse places everybody into two camps. Either you're pro-science or you're anti-science. And it makes sense as to why that's what we see in the mainstream, because those are the two extremes. But as with all things, I think there's more of a spectrum of beliefs rather than this determinative paradigm that we place on people. That basically says, if X is true, then it means Y. So for example, if you get the vaccine, it's because you're pro-science. If you don't get the vaccine, it's because you're anti-science. And that paradigm disregards the entire potential range of beliefs that lies somewhere in the middle of those extremes. And so with this video, I wanted to explain my hesitancy because I believe the reasoning for it isn't really addressed at all by the two extremes. I wanted to explain why I'm moving past that hesitancy to go and get the vaccine. And also, I don't know if this will help, but I know that vaccine hesitancy is a huge problem in the US where I am right now. And so I just wanted to share what helped me get past mine, and hopefully someone can take something valuable from that. So there's this belief that I can't specifically accredit to any one person or group, but it's the idea that over the past 2 millennia, humanity hasn't actually progressed, only our technology has. And one of the reasons we haven't progressed is because of our over-reliance on that technology to fix our problems for us. The idea is that we're basically the same as the human beings that existed 2,000 years ago, only with better technology. Now, 2 things right off the bat. 1, I should specify that when I say progress, I'm talking about a moral progression, which I will very, very loosely define as the process of each new generation taking from their predecessors what worked and leaving behind what was ineffective or harmful. That will eventually lead to wholesale changes in societal behavior. And 2, this is an extremely hyperbolic view. There are almost too many examples to count that show that human morality has progressed over time. Right off the top of my head, I can think of slavery. 150 years ago, the global consensus was that this was the way to build a society. Now, we see slavery as what it is, an abomination and a violation of human rights. Now, I know that that practice is still perpetuated in some pockets of the earth. However, the global consensus is that slavery should be abolished. So the idea that humanity hasn't progressed at all, I believe, is inaccurate and unhelpful. However, I do think that there's some merit to this idea of an over-reliance on technology to fix our problems for us, and whatever that may mean for us as a species. Alright, so how does this idea tie in with the pandemic and the vaccine? Well, I think this idea is a really interesting lens which we can use to view the pandemic. We had a situation where some countries as early as June 2020, simply by implementing changes in their behaviors and incentivizing their citizens to abide by those behavioral changes, were able to largely stifle the effects of COVID-19. And in some cases were able to eradicate it completely for a period of time. Now with that example, I'm specifically talking about New Zealand, as they were declared COVID-free in early June. Now, I know that COVID has popped up periodically in New Zealand over the past couple of months. However, we cannot in good faith argue that those numbers are in any way comparable to what we experienced in the US. So to claim that their solution was just as ineffective as our own is, in my opinion, a disingenuous argument. Now, I want to stress here, it is not my intent to argue whether the strategies implemented in New Zealand could have been deployed in other countries around the world. I am not a political expert, I do not claim to know, I don't have very much knowledge at all in those spaces. But all we can say definitively is that what they did worked, and that their success was largely based around changing their behaviors as a country, and not by relying on the process of a technological or medicinal breakthrough. So hopefully the point I'm making now is becoming a little bit clearer. The reason I was holding some hesitation towards getting the vaccine was because I thought this was another perfect example of us relying too heavily on technology to fix a problem for us, even though other solutions were available and actually proven to be effective. But let me back up a little bit because I don't want to be misconstrued as saying that I don't think we should even have a vaccine. That is absolutely not my point. I had the same concern when self-driving cars were being talked about in the news 24/7. And when I brought it up to my friends, unfortunately they came to the conclusion that I didn't support self-driving cars. That isn't the case. I just had an issue with the reason behind their development, because if we're looking at those self-driving cars to solve our problems that we are actually capable of solving ourselves, then I couldn't really get behind that reasoning. But it doesn't mean I don't want to see a world with self-driving cars, just like it doesn't mean I don't want to see a world with a COVID-19 vaccine. But look, I am not a philosopher or a therapist or a part of any profession that demands a certain level of respect when discussing issues of human morality. So all this is a guy pointing out a pattern that, according to him, seems a little bit worrisome. I also want to point out that if you take that mode of thinking of relying on something to fix your problem for you versus adjusting your behavior to fix it yourself, and you shrink it down to a personal level, then I am the most guilty of that type of thought process. I remember when I was 22 or 23, I went to a doctor and he told me that I had high cholesterol. I had been eating nothing but Costco frozen pizzas and bourbon chicken all day, every day. And he told me right then and there, he was like, look, you're young, you have plenty of time, you need to change your diet, you need to add some greens, exercise a little bit more, and you'll be fine. And I was like, cool, what can you prescribe? And I was lucky because he looked at me and he was like, dude, you need to change your lifestyle. That's all you need to do. And I'll be honest, I went home and I didn't do that for a very long time. And it's because in my life I have always taken the option that required me to do the least amount of work. Because I would rather something else fix me than me adjust myself to fix my situation. So by pointing all of this out, I'm not trying to absolve myself from thinking like this. I'm not the guy on the hill looking down and pointing out what everybody is doing wrong. I'm the guy in the middle of all of that, doing that wrong thing and finally realizing that, hey, this hasn't really worked out for me. And so now that I'm seeing that on a larger scale, I'm a little bit worried that this mentality won't work out for us. So that's why I didn't want to get the vaccine originally. I felt that by doing so, I'd be contributing to a mentality that I know, at least on a personal scale, to be harmful. It wasn't because I was anti-science. Every study will show just how incredibly effective these vaccines have been. So there was never any intent to refute those studies. I just saw this solution as indicative of a larger problem concerning our mentality when it comes to technological and medicinal advancements. So my reluctance was born of this idea that by getting the vaccine, I would be contributing to this problematic mentality. But then I spoke to my family and they helped me realize that this just wasn't the case. After listening to my reasons, acknowledging where they felt I had legitimate claims, and gently correcting me where I was thoroughly incorrect, it helped me to see that the act of getting the vaccine itself would not be compromising on my beliefs. But if I were to get the vaccine and immediately assume my pre-pandemic behavior, then that would be a capitulation of my morals. Because it would demonstrate that I didn't learn anything from the experience. It would mean that I used the vaccine as exactly what I described here. A medicinal advancement that fixed my problems so that I could avoid taking the necessary steps to fix my problem myself. But the simple act of getting the vaccine doesn't imply that. All getting the vaccine does is ensure that you are not a direct threat to the lives of the people around you. What matters is what I do after I get the vaccine. So what's my solution? Well, like I said, I'm going to get the vaccine. And then I'm going to try to continue living under these new circumstances with these modified behaviors. So I'm going to keep maintaining 6 feet. I'm going to keep wearing a mask. My default mode is going to be to isolate. I haven't been to a social gathering with more than 5 people in over a year, and it's probably going to stay that way for the foreseeable future. And so I think this solution allows me to maintain my principles without putting others' lives at risk. And I wanted to make this because I know I didn't fit comfortably into these boxes, these extremes. No, I'm not now getting the vaccine because I'm all of a sudden pro-science, and no, I wasn't withholding from getting the vaccine because I was anti-science. My reasoning fell somewhere along that spectrum. And I think it'd be extremely narcissistic to believe that I'm the only one. I think there are millions and millions of people, each with their own reasons as to why they're getting the vaccine or why they're not getting it, that don't fit comfortably into these extremes. But putting them in those boxes doesn't address those reasons. And I think it's a very human reaction to say, if you're not going to listen to me or understand my reasoning, and you're just going to put me in a box, then I have no obligation to appease you. And so even though I don't agree with that response, I can empathize with it. Because they're responding to the attack, not to the facts. So all in all, I think if we're going to get past this vaccine hesitancy, I think there needs to be a more balanced approach in addressing people's reasons for not getting the vaccine, instead of reducing them all down to a single personality trait because of one decision. But again, all of this is just observation from somebody with no qualifications and very little scientific research behind it. So please take all of this with a huge grain of salt. But thank you for allowing me to express myself. I really do feel at my best when I get to do this. So truly, truly, thank you if you're watching. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.
Drifting away like a feather in air, letting